What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we have the last part of a 3-part series where I've been explaining what I was doing for that month that I took off from posting YouTube videos, and I was in the Google Sheets making prospect models because I really wanted to refine my process where, with running backs in general, which we're going to talk about today, is for a guy like Breece Hall. We know he's a very strong prospect, but we get a lot more info if we can compare prospects to previous classes, right? How does Breece Hall stack up against a Saquon Barkley? Is he a Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott level prospect? Is he more of a J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers, Najee Harris type level prospect? Is he better than that? It's really important that when we're in these rookie drafts that we look at everything with context. We don't want to be prisoners of the moment and think that every RB1 in every class is weighted the same, if that makes sense. So this is kind of what prospect modeling can kind of help us with and see how running backs compare historically to other running back prospects. So we're going to get into how the prospect model works. We're then going to get into my top 5 running backs for 2022 and how the model likes them and what it spits out as their comp. So with that being said, let's not waste any more time. Make sure you go down below, subscribe, leave a like. Let's go.
Thirsty, trying to choose. I know I'm pretty cool. My nitty bag.
So in the first 2 videos, we had a really long-winded breakdown of the purpose of the model and kind of the origins of it. Today, we're just going to do a brief overview of the entire modeling process and then go right into the ins and outs of the running back model. So with the model, across all 3 positions, I have it as named for now. Maybe eventually I'll think of something cooler, but for now we have the Ron Stewart grading system, or the RSGS, whatever you want to call it. And the idea is that I wanted to make a model to identify as many winners as possible and kind of give a unique perspective on these prospects by using film, other cool stuff, and analytics, and kind of bringing it all together to cover as many bases as I can. So let's dive into the running back model itself. And for each prospect, every running back prospect gets an RS grade, which is the Ron Stewart grade, on a scale of 1 to 10 that correlates to a running back's points per game in his first 3 seasons, which is a really good barometer for success, especially running backs. We want early on production so they accrue roster value and they score points for our fantasy teams. And as you guys can see here, these are the top running backs in RS grade from 2019 through 2017. So those draft classes. The RS grades are on a scale from 0 through 10, but I do have multipliers where if you hit them, you can go above a 10 for things like freak athleticism and yards created and other stuff we'll get into in a little bit. And Saquon Barkley, freak athlete, so he hits that multiplier and he gets there into legendary. And the thing about these RS grades is that they're pretty to look at, right? We see them, Saquon Barkley, McCaffrey, Fournette, Dalvin Cook, Mixon. They look pretty. The top 12 hit rate among the legendaries and elites are really, really solid. But the question is, are they predictive? Are we gaining anything from looking at these? Are they simply just pretty to look at? So how we figure that out is we test them for significance against first 3-year point per game. And my RS grades have a 0.52 R squared to a running back's points per game in their first 3 years. R squared is just the correlation coefficient squared. So how much of a running back's first 3-year point per game can be explained by the RS grades? Mathematically, that would be 52% as the R squared, and draft capital is around 0.35 to 0.4. So we have a pretty good leg up on the NFL. This is a stronger model than the running back one, not as strong as the quarterback one, but I'm still really happy with it because I think running back is harder to predict than quarterback. Now, to take this even a step further, we don't just want to order the RS grades and take them from there and then boom, those are our rookie running back rankings. We want to have a little bit more nuance to them, because if one guy has a 9.5 RS grade and the other has a 9.47, I think it would be misguided to just, say, okay, that's it. We're just going to hit the 9.5 or the 9.47. From there, you can kind of dig in and really get into the nitty gritty and have some nuance there where you can then just decide which running back you like better based on just the profile and just the human element of you looking over their profile. But it's a good idea to have the model and the RS grades guide us. And how we do that is we bucket them into prospect tiers. This is a idea that is inspired by at DF Bean Counter on Twitter. He is one of the first guys I've ever seen make prospect buckets based off hit rate. So to add a little bit of context, I'm going to show the tiers on screen here. So I bucketed the grades by top 12 season hit rate. Top 24 is too easy for running backs. Literally, if you just start a full season, you can get into the top 24. So based on top 12 hit rate, we have our tiers, which are Madden themed. We have legendary, which hit top 12 seasons at a 100% rate. We have elite, which hit top 12 seasons at an 80% rate, gold 50%, silver 25%, and bronze 7%. And with this, we kind of just let the tiers guide us, and then we make the decisions within each tier to then develop our own rankings. And it just is sort of to guide us and, kind of put bumpers on us to lead us, I guess, in that metaphor, to a strike in bowling. So now let's break down how the RS grades for running backs themselves are built. First, we have production, which makes up 47.5% of the grade, film, which makes up 22% of the grade, athleticism, which makes up 16% of the grade, receiving, which makes up 7.5% of the grade, and then age profile, which I know sounds weird, we'll explain it later, is 7% of the profile. All of that together is 100% of the RS grade. So our production metric or component is pretty straightforward. Did RBX produce, and did he do it against good competition? And the competition part is really important. The model really cares about it. It is the second biggest input in the entire model, the biggest input in the production category, but it's SRS. And SRS is defined as a simple rating system, a rating that takes into account average point differential and strength of schedule. The rating is denominated in points above/below average, where 0 is average. And it's pretty much the strength of schedule combined with the quality of the team you play. And Georgia was first in SRS last year. They won the national championship. So that kind of gives you guys an idea of, if you are the number one team at the end of the year, you probably have the best SRS. And the model really cares about that. Ideally, you are running against SEC competition, Big Ten competition. You are competing in backfields with other recruits that were good enough to make it to those schools. And I don't really know how I feel about it, because we have seen Alabama running backs get pushed up, or we've had guys like, I'm trying to think. Damian Harris isn't a great example, but we've had other guys like maybe Trent Richardson would be a decent example. Maybe an Eddie Lacy would be a decent example. But you do get these Alabama running backs that get pushed up, but at the same time, sometimes it's justified with guys like Najee Harris and Josh Jacobs giving you top 12 seasons. You also have guys like Derrick Henry. So it's a running back factory, and I'm just using Alabama as an example, but in the model, it wants you to be at least from a Power 5 school. Then the next two inputs are surrounding adjusted yards per play. And this is a player's receiving yards times 2 and rushing yards divided by a total team plays. It's just an emphasis on receiving work. How much are you producing within your offense? Then we chart that over every single year in a player's college career, and we measure how much a prospect overperformed or underperformed each year based on the thresholds that I have set for running backs. Then we take an average of the overperforming and underperforming, and we get our average over expectation. And using Najee Harris as an example here, you can see that he has the red lines in the first 2 years and the green lines in the last 2 years. We take all of those together, we average them together, and that gives us our average adjusted yards per play over expectation. Then we have our adjusted yards per play peak over expectation. And in the model, we also want to account for a running back's peak if they really, really go off one year. And we can see that with Najee Harris, because in year 4, he had his best year. And we account for that, and we communicate that to the model, while also communicating to the model that it should be discounted for him being in year 4. That's why it's not a huge green line, and it's kind of taken on that curve where you can kind of see the dotted line goes up and the green line isn't as high as it would be if there wasn't the dotted line there. And that's to account for both his big breakout, but then also account for him being in year 4. Now I'm going a little bit out of order here, but the next one we're going to talk about is breakout year, which I believe has a 5% input, or I think it's 2.5% input now that I look at it. Yeah, it's 2.5% input. And I figured we just mentioned this here because breakout year is simply the first year where a running back passes that dotted line. So in my database, I have different thresholds than Campus to Canton, but for the simplicity of this, as we see here, Najee Harris gets that first green line in year 3. So in the model, he is listed as a year 3 breakout. Then we have rushing yard market share over expectation, which is pretty easy. It's our third main stat at also being one of those 7.5%ers in the production component. And it's pretty self-explanatory. It is simply what percentage of a player's team's rushing yards is he accounting for? And this gives us kind of a pure rushing / dominance of a backfield type metric. Ideally, we want players to run the ball a ton early. And to get the over expectation part of this metric, we also do the same thing where we take a player's, how much he overperforms and underperforms his thresholds across his entire career and average them together. So we make sure that a 55% rushing yard market share at age 18 or in year one is weighted more than someone who does the same thing, 55% rushing yard market share at 23. Ideally, in the model, unlike quarterback where breakout age and stuff wasn't really a big factor, at running back, we want young running backs who produce early and show that they're special, which ties into our last production metric, which is breakout age. And this is the age at which a running back surpasses a 15% dominator rating. Dominator rating is just a running back's market share of total yards and touchdowns within his offense. And it's just another metric that weights early production at running back. Again, we want early producers. Our next component in the model is draft capital at 22%. And this whole component film is pretty straightforward. I got to be honest, I'm not a film guy. I'm not going to sit here and break down the all 22 for two reasons. I'm not going to be able to watch a running back hit a hole and break it for a touchdown and tell you guys that that player is amazing. You show me some white kid in high school doing crazy things. I remember back in the day when me and my buddies, we would just drool over those crazy like high school mixtape, college mixtape type highlight reels, and a lot of them never panned out, like Tavon Austin and DeAnthony Thomas. I can watch a guy on tape and understand what the play call was, and is it cover 3? Is there one safety up top, 2 safeties? Is the nickel coming into blitz? I have a pretty good understanding of what's going on the field, but I cannot watch a player and then say, yes, what he's doing right now is going to translate to the NFL level. There's just no way. But I can be like, man, that guy looks sick on tape, right? If you look at Jalen Darden's college mixtape, he was sick. Same thing with Kadarius Toney. Not to say that they're not going to be great, but there are a lot of players that have special, eye-popping highlight reels and look crazy. And it's like, how is that not going to translate to the next level? And it doesn't. Same thing with a guy like Braxton Miller too. So I can look at film and see what's going on, and I can understand what's going on in the football field, but I can't translate that into prospecting. And on top of that, it's so much time to watch the all 22 for every prospect that I want in my database. There'd be no way. So instead, I lean on the expertise of others, and the first pillar of film, or actually the only pillar of film, is draft capital. And it's my biggest input in the entire model. It's the biggest input across all the models because these are billion-dollar organizations in the NFL doing hours of research on these players, watching their pro days, their combines, watching their all 22 film from all of their seasons in college. They are literally paid from 9 to 5 to watch the film. Now, there are analytics departments, but it's still not super accepted in the NFL. I would still say, for the most part, draft capital is film driven. Now, in the other two models, I use Lance Zierlein's grades as inputs in the model. And I still do use Lance Zierlein's draft grades across all of my models. It was a really, really big point of emphasis for me. I wanted to use his film grades in all the model. He does great work. And I just want an aspect outside of draft capital that accounts for film on a level that I can't provide. And with running back, we do it a little bit different. The RS grades don't get a direct Lance Zierlein input where it's a percentage of the model, but instead I use his grades as a tiered multiplier on the pre-multiplier RS grades. Now that sounds kind of weird, but his grades are still super strong. The only problem is that I only have the data for 2014 running backs and beyond. And the problem is that if I used them in the process, it was holding back the other running backs from 2008, 2009, where they weren't getting enough of a bump from just like projected Lance Zierlein scores, where it was throwing off the R-squareds a little bit. So instead, I made them multipliers and have thresholds from 6.35 all the way to 7+ grades. And as you guys can see here, the guy is a damn wizard. He makes these grades before the NFL draft. And this is every running back with a 6.7 or better grade, and he literally called Jordan Howard. That is one of the most impressive ones to me. A day 3 pick, 5th rounder. He gave a 6.7 grade, up there with guys like Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara, and I guess Josh Jacobs you can put in there too, but he saw that on tape. A day 3 guy, he planted his flag on, he got a top 12 hit out of him. It's wild. I mean, you also have other guys here that get really big bumps from it, and Alvin Kamara and DeAndre Swift, and it bumps Ezekiel Elliott and Saquon Barkley into legendary status with his 7+ grades all being hits, and Saquon, Zeke, Fournette. He has top 12 hits all the way down to 6.78. It's really, really strong. Then we have athleticism, which goes without saying, but I think at running back, athleticism is arguably the most important in terms of position. I think that athleticism doesn't make a ton of a difference for wide receivers and quarterbacks, but at running back, we want size, we want speed, we want that size to shoulder a big workload, and we also want running backs able to break off really long runs and score us fantasy points. And the way I measure this is with 2 metrics. And the first one is speed score, which is one of the biggest inputs in the model, but it's defined as the formula being weight times 200 divided by 40 times to the 4th power, which sounds really weird, but it just factors weight into a player's 40-yard dash time, assigning a premium to fast times run by I don't even know what that word was, by bigger, often stronger running backs. And this metric juices guys like Saquon Barkley, Antonio Gibson, Derrick Henry. We want thick boys who run fast. And one of the reasons why Derrick Henry is an elite running back in my model, but not super highly regarded in others, is because of speed score. It's also because of his 6.7 Land Zero Line grade. And we also then look at relative athletic score, which is RAS. And this is a metric that spits out a score from 0 through 10 based on a running back's size, speed, agility, and explosion relative to other running backs. This is Jonathan Taylor, just to show you guys what an A+ looks like. 9.53 is an A+ score. Size, speed, explosion. He has all of it pretty much. And RAS is not only an RS grade input, it's also a multiplier like Land Zero Line grade. So it says only a 4% input initially, pre-multiplier, but it has a pretty big multiplier where if you have a good profile and you're a freak athlete, you get a really nice multiplier, because ideally we want a prerequisite profile there from production and receiving and all that we can then add the multiplier on top of it. We don't just want to bump up freaks for no reason. Kind of like I think your Nile Davises of the world kind of fall into that category. And I'm trying to think of other ones, but I mean, maybe not Bo Scarborough, but yeah, we don't just want, or I think a really good one would actually be Kalen Ballage, but exactly. A guy like Kalen Ballage, you don't just want to push up guys who are freak athletes without the prerequisite production to go along with it. Then we have our receiving component, which is pretty small, and I could have lumped this in with production and it would have been fine at 7.5%, but I wanted it to be its own thing for rookie comps, where I think it's really good to keep receiving separate when comparing players, because it's a really big part of a player's just overall profile and differentiating, because you don't want Nick Chubb to be compared to a guy like Christian McCaffrey because they both produced. We want to have a grade within our rookie comps that kind of separate that. And the only metric we use here is receiving yard market share over expectation, which is pretty straightforward. We take the market share of receiving yards a running back was responsible for, and then we figure out their average over expectation depending on how much they overshoot our thresholds. And I wanted to show with this kind of like chicken scratch type graph here, I think it's a good explanation of how I come up with the average over expectation. And CMC outproduces thresholds in year 1 by 4.6%, 15.3% in year 2, 8.3%. It's a bug cutting me off. So we have the threshold being set at 4.6%, or hold on. I got it. So Christian McCaffrey outproduced his threshold by 4.6% in year 1, 15.3% in year 2, and 8.3% in year 3, which gives him an average receiving yard market share over expectation of 9.4, which is an A+ grade. Then we have our last component, which I call age profile, which is still unsure of if I'm going to keep that name, but it takes into account a player's draft age and early declare status, which are 2 really important factors when we're talking about prospects. And I'm not just saying that just to say it. Blair Andrews, who does really good research on this topic and just prospecting in general, in his column, The Wrong Read on RotoViz, he is one of the OGs in the fantasy space. He does great stuff. And here he kind of looked into it to see how much it really did affect these prospects. And it shows. On the left, we have a chart that shows that players score more points the younger their draft age is. And the chart on the right shows that early declares score more points as well. And I think this just comes down to the fact that we want players who are undeniable to the point where they were yanked from college early to compete with NFL talent. Now, the issue is that both of these graphs were made for wide receivers. So what I ended up doing was testing if it was significant for running backs, and it graded out as predictive. So I then found the drop-offs in draft age and early declare to make a grading system based off of a prospect's point per game through their first 3 seasons, and kind of just develop exactly what the whole thing is called an age profile, just a player's profile in terms of their age and early declare and what is deemed as significant in those categories. So what I came up with is that 20 to 22 years old on draft day and early declare is my A+. They average 8.98 points per game through their first 3 seasons. I think a lot of people want 20 to 21, but I found 22 early declares really aren't much different from 21-year-old declares. or early declares. The only time that I care about a player being a 21-year-old early declare is when I'm bumping a player up from legendary or from elite to legendary. To make it from elite to legendary, you have to be a 10 or better grade, a top 10 draft pick, 21 years old, early declare. That bumps you into legendary. Then we just have the rest of the ages sort of independent of early declare. We have 22 but non-early declares are B+, averaging 6.65 points per game through their first 3 seasons. Ideally, if you didn't declare early, we want that running back to be as young as possible, not only just for production purposes, but for dynasty trade value. We don't want to have a 24-year-old non-early declare, especially if he's not good at football. And then the last 2 are 23 years old either. So if you're an early declare but you're 23, you're kind of missing the whole point of being an early declare. Same thing with 24 or older than that. At that point, doesn't matter if you're an early declare. We want players who are younger. If you're any older than 22 and you're not an early declare, we just want the youngest player possible. Or if you're just older than 22 in general, we want the youngest player possible regardless of early declare. Then I just want to go over my multipliers real quick. First, we have the LZ grade, which is mentioned earlier. That's a multiplier. We have RAS, which was mentioned earlier as a multiplier. Our third and final multiplier is yards created, and it's a metric defined by Graham Barfield here, which is the amount of yards a running back gains on their own after they reach the second level past the offensive line's blocking. And it's pretty straightforward. How many yards are you creating independent of your blocking per rush? And here are the running backs who hit my yards created multiplier, and it's not tiered like Lance Zierlein where I have, okay, if you're a 7 and above, you get this multiplier. If you're a 6.8 and above, you get this multiplier. For yards created, simply if you hit my threshold, you get the multiplier. And this is all the running backs that hit my multiplier while also showing their pre-multiplier grades. So you can kind of see how much of a bump each of them got. And the top 5 or so guys in Saquon, McCaffrey, Zeke, Fournette, Dalvin Cook, or actually just the top 4 guys in Saquon, McCaffrey, Zeke, and Fournette, they already had strong profiles, but yards created vaulted guys like Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, Javonte Williams, and Alvin Kamara into elite tier. And thankfully, the multiplier isn't strong enough that it vaulted any of Kenyon Drake, Darrell Henderson, Anthony McFarland, and Joe Williams into elite or better. So I think it's a really nice give and take where it's not too strong that it's elevating guys like Kenyon Drake and Darrell Henderson into spots where we could really get burned for overdrafting them, but then also identifying guys like Alvin Kamara as elite prospects. Now, Alvin Kamara jumped over Kenyon Drake and Deontay Foreman, along with Javonte Williams as well, because I also think that they hit either RAS multipliers or Lance Zierlein multipliers. So now you've made it this far, and I think the only way that I can reward the true supporters of the channel that have sat through me explaining the entire model is by actually applying it to the 2022 class. So we're going to go through each prospect and where they fall into each prospect tier, my RS grades, and then also go over their closest comps in my database based off of their 5 core components. Now, I cannot stress enough, the model itself, the comps, everything, we are in stage 1.0 right now, Mach 1. The whole idea is I'm 20 years old doing this right now. Eventually, I would like it to be, we're going to refine it as the years go on and make it something that is really, really, just really useful and really actionable. But for now, this is all, I'm also always open to suggestions and everything, but this is for right now what I got for comps and just the RS grades in general. So at RB1, we're going to start this off with Breece Hall, which is a very, very easy running back to greatest RB1. He is my RB1 in this class, and he's the only running back that qualifies for elite. Now, before I even talk about Breece, let's sort of go over this screenshot. It's pretty loaded, so let me explain it a little bit. And on the left, we have a prospects info, which is just draft round, draft pick, and draft year. I will say for these rookies, I used their projected draft capital from grinding the mocks. That's why you'll see Breece Hall being a second round pick, 44th overall. That's what he is on there. Then we have a player's prospect tier. As we said earlier, legendary hits top 12 seasons at a 100% rate, elite 80%, gold 50%, silver 25%, bronze 7%. And then on the right, you have a player's official RS grade. And then past that, we have the rookie comps area, which is where I separated the model into its 5 core components so that we can then use those to compare players in terms of just kind of play style and just their profile in general. And the idea here is each of those outputs are graded on an A+ to F scale. And to find these comps, we have a rule pretty much where if, let's say, your film was a B+, I only added players that had A-, B+, or B into your rookie comps list. And then I did that across all 5 of them, so they're all fairly similar. And for Breece Hall, he is a really clean prospect, and his comps are juicy. He's got Joe Mixon, Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb, and Matt Forte. I really like the Matt Forte comp. Just a really solid group of running backs, and he checks every box: size, speed, 3-down skill set, 3 years of production. I don't really expect him to be right away or ever be the Jonathan Taylor RB1 overall in fantasy type guy. I think that he is more likely a Mixon, Chubb, Forte, where he can be anywhere from a top 5 to top 12 dynasty running back, and I expect him to have a couple top 12 finishes by the time it's all said and done. Again, I don't think he is a Saquon Barkley level prospect, but to me, he is a Chubb, Forte, Mixon. You can compare him as well to a J.K. Dobbins from that 2020 class, where he was regarded as a top 3 running back in that class. I think in that 2020 class, he would be in that range around, Swift, JT, those guys at the top. Again, don't think he's Saquon Barkley level, but I do think that he is a very, very strong prospect. And these running backs fall off fast. At running back 2, we have Kenneth Walker, who is the only gold running back in this class. And his profile is really tough because he's 0.01 away from being elite. All you need to get into elite tier is an 8.00 RS grade. But I'm also kind of glad he falls into gold. I don't think that his profile is strong enough to be elite. His raw profile is a silver, but he hit the yards created multiplier, and that boosted him into the gold tier. So I'm kind of happy he didn't make it into elite, and we'll go over his knocks in a second, but he was also the only running back in this class to hit the yards created threshold. He is one of the best pure runners in the class, and that's really, really solid, but it also comes with its red flags. For a between the tackles type, he's kind of undersized at 211 pounds. He also was a complete 0 in the receiving game, which we don't love for fantasy. He got a C grade in that category at a 2.7% market share of receiving yards, just as his best season ever last year. Technically, in this group, as you guys can see, Bernard Pierce is the only other running back with a C receiving grade. The rest of them shouldn't even really be qualified at B minuses, because that would be C, C plus, B minus, but I just had to expand it so it wasn't just Bernard Pierce. But technically, his closest comp is Bernard Pierce, and that's probably fair. Now, this class is pretty weak, so even with that being said and me not really loving his profile, I still don't mind him around the 107 range for me. I think it's a fine swing. He's 21 years old. Maybe he hits a top 12 season. I know a lot of people have him as like a top 3 to 5 guy in rookie draft. I think that's a mistake. I also think among this rookie comps list, I don't think Tevin Coleman is actually a bad comp at all. I think guys like Le'Veon Bell and Cam Akers are a little bit too optimistic, but a guy like Tevin Coleman, I wasn't really around to see what Bernard Pierce did, but I think that this list, if you're going to cling to Le'Veon Bell, Cam Akers, even a guy like Darius Geis, I think it's being a little bit too kind to Kenneth Walker. So with that being said, RB2 very easily, but he's not someone I feel strongly about. I hope to not have any shares, or maybe in a couple spots, but ideally I'd be trading off of a pick where I'd have to take Walker. Then at RB3, we have Isaiah Spiller, who is just so meh to me. Like, the only bright spots on his profile is that he's a 21-year-old early declare who broke out as a freshman, so he's produced for a while and he's a good age. There's just not anything past that we can really cling to. He's not a plus athlete. Ran a 4.64 40 at his pro day, and I know Noah Hills, he does really great work. He has an article on how bad Spiller was in terms of efficiency next to his teammates and Devin A. Chain and whoever the other guy is. And apparently he performed very bad in those metrics, where comparatively to the other running backs in his backfield, he wasn't really doing a whole lot. I'm just really not interested in the profile outside of the fact that he's going to get day 2 draft capital, which for running backs, especially in this class, is going to be few and far between. And I guess he has some bright spots in his comps, right? We have David Montgomery, Kerryon Johnson, Jeremy Hill, which I guess Kerryon Johnson and Jeremy Hill aren't great, but they showed flashes early on in their career. I think David Montgomery is actually a pretty good ceiling comp for Isaiah Spiller. I won't be touching him in the first round of rookie drafts. I know a lot of people have him in that 107 to 110, 111 range. If he goes third round and his landing spot isn't anything crazy, he will be an early to mid second rounder for me. I'm just not overly interested. Then at RB4, we have Rachaad White, who is such a weird profile because my model both loves and hates him. And what I mean by that is that he grades out as a bronze profile, which is the worst prospect tier possible, 7% top 12 hit rate. The thing is that the model spits out some really crazy comps for him, even in bronze tier, where it has Aaron Jones, Chase Edmonds, and Tony Pollard among his rookie comp, which is crazy. I know it might look like, oh, but you're kind of doing it yourself and you can just kind of get whatever comps in there you want. I did the same thing for Zamir White, who I really like, and his comps were garbage. Like, it was really bad. You had guys like, I'm trying to even think of who they were, but you had guys like just absolute nobodies at the running back position that you've just never heard of. Like, they were really scary to see. And Zamir White's someone I like, and he was locked into like RB4, RB5 for me for a while, but recently he has gotten his 3rd round draft capital changed to 4th round. Day 2 to day 3 is a really big knock for running back, so I'm good on Zamir White for now. He's probably my RB6. But with Rachaad White, I really like the comp of Tony Pollard. I think that that's actually a really fair comp. He is someone where Rachaad White is a guy that I'll be making an exception for in the model. I know that I know my model, I don't know why I said they, like I don't control the model, but in terms of RS grades, he's a bronze prospect in my model. Even if he got 3rd round draft capital, he'd be a bronze prospect. I personally will be valuing him as a silver prospect. I actually like his profile a ton. I love the receiving upside. He also showed really good athleticism at 4.48 40. He's a very interesting profile. So for now, he's pretty much locked in as my RB4. Then at RB5, which I think is wide open, for now I'm going to put James Cook here, simply just due to the 2 things that my model likes about him is that he's slated to get round 3 draft capital, which is pretty much because he's Dalvin Cook's younger brother and he's a Georgia running back. So I think because of that, NFL teams will probably draft him higher. And then he also has an elite SRS playing for Georgia last year. Everything else in his profile is pretty mid. You have a 4.42 40, which is good, but he's 199 pounds, which puts him in this small running back area next to Amir Abdullah and LaMichael James as his comps, which aren't bad. LaMichael James, another guy who is a really fun prospect, or has a really fun highlight reel at Oregon. It's not awful, Amir Abdullah and LaMichael James. There was once upon a time where Amir Abdullah was actually really interesting in fantasy. He's just here for now because he's a day 2 running back. At the end of the day, this RB5 spot is wide open. Depends on who gets that day 2 draft capital. If Zamir White gets there, I would like him. I also like guys like Keontae Ingram and Tyler Goodson, but I don't think that they get the draft capital to get there. So again, really just comes down to who gets day 2 draft capital. If James Cook doesn't, then it's just an absolute shit show at RB5. So this running back class, outside of the top 3 or 4 guys, really rough. Now that's going to do it for us today, fellas. As always, if you enjoyed this video and you enjoy the prospect talk and the model talk and you want to take a look at it and apply it to your dynasty strategy and teams, I have my RS grades, my rookie rankings, my Superflex my Superflex tight end premium top 250 grades or rankings, all down below in the description on the Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. It'll be in the description. It'll be down below in the comments. And again, it is currently $5 per month right now. But starting, I think by the NFL draft, I'm going to have it set up so that the tiers bump up to $8 instead of $5, and then some other cool stuff in between. So if you get in right now at $5 per month, everyone that gets in before the big update will be grandfathered in at a $5 rate instead of the new rates after that. So if you want to get in at a discounted price before I change things, hop in now, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. As always, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you go down below, subscribe, leave a like, and I will see you guys in the next one. Right under 40 minutes. Let's go.
Chatham's on. Foolies glad I'm home. Even my haters kinda glad I'm on. Rest in peace to my vagabond. Rapper, song, singer, suspended, subpoena for misdemeanors. Dreamer, held back asses, Loki still a